Coming up on Dr. Kiki's Science Hour, we're talking about going to Mars. Get the heck out of Dodge, folks, with Dr. Robert Zubrin, who's the president of the Mars Society. That's up next on Dr. Kiki's Science Hour.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit. Bandwidth for Dr. Kiki's Science Hour is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Dr. Kiki's Science Hour with me, Dr. Kiki, episode 67, recorded on Thursday, October 7th, 2010. Marsifest Destiny. Welcome to Dr. Kiki's Science Hour. I'm Dr. Kiki. This is episode 67, and today we're traveling out of this Earth. We're going to Mars, or at least that's the idea. This is a show where we spend an hour, or about that amount of time, talking to a single person on a single topic in science. Get kind of down and dirty and deep into the subject in a way that you're not normally allowed in a lot of other programs. And today, Mars is the topic. It's an interesting place. It's a planet that has a lot of questions for us. We've looked at it for years as this distant planet. Could we go there? Could we not go there? Books have been written about Mars. Kim Stanley Robinson's Mars trilogy is one that opened up the imaginations of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people around the world to thinking about ways that we could get to Mars. Do we even want to go to Mars? Why do we want to do this? All these questions and more. Why don't we talk to somebody who lives and breathes and eats this stuff? We are talking today with the president of the Mars Society, Robert Zubrin. Robert, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome. Now, to get us started, how you're a nuclear physicist or a nuclear engineer, and you have a PhD in nuclear physics. How did you start there and end up thinking about going to Mars and trying to get people to get behind this idea that it is our Marsifest destiny? We should be going to Mars.
Well, I started a long time before that. I was 5 when Sputnik flew. And while to the adult world, Sputnik may have been a terrifying thing, to me as a little kid, it was absolutely exhilarating. I was already reading science fiction, and what Sputnik said to me was that these stories about the spacefaring future that I was reading about were going to be true. And, I was 9 when Kennedy committed us to go to the moon. I saw him give that speech on TV from my 4th grade classroom. And we were going. We were going to the moon by 1970, Mars by 1980, Saturn by 1990, Alpha Centauri by the year 2000, and I wanted to be part of it. And, initially, of course, that program was realized. We did make it to the moon before 1970. But just about that time, while the astronauts were landing on the moon, Nixon was pulling out the rug from under the program, was destroying it, and the whole thing was shut down. We could have been on Mars by 1980, or actually 1981. Was NASA's plan, but the program was destroyed. And to me, who had gotten a scientific education based in significant part on my excitement about this great adventure of human expansion to space, and I'm sure for millions of others this was an enormous disappointment. And for a while I accepted it. I became a high school science teacher for 8 years, but then I said no. And I went back to graduate school, started getting advanced technical education, and then I heard about these people called the Mars Underground who were pushing for NASA setting its sights back on human exploration beyond Earth orbit, and in particular to Mars. And I linked up with them, and then I got a job at Martin Marietta, which is now Lockheed Martin, doing preliminary design of interplanetary missions. And when the first President Bush announced that he wanted to go back to the moon and on to Mars, and NASA came up with an impossible plan, that is to say impossibly costly and impossibly slow for doing it, I and people I was working with were ready and willing to step into the breach and offer a plan that could really get us there with present-day technology within 10 years of program start, and that was the Mars Direct plan.
Right.
And that caused quite a stir, because we basically threw down on the table, say, look, if you want to go to Mars, you can. It's going to take some risk, but if you're willing to take the risk, you can go to Mars. We can go to Mars, not some other generation. And I guess I became very well known after that, and I wrote a book called The Case for Mars, which explains the plan in detail. And it's been the challenge staring NASA in the face ever since. If you want to go to Mars, you can be on Mars in 10 years. Okay, if you're not willing to accept the risk of going to Mars, if you want to postpone it for 50 years or 100 years, or basically beyond your own time, sure, you can do that too. You can say, what are all the other things we might want to do before we go to Mars? And if you adopt that approach, you never go to Mars and you never have to embrace the risk. But we can go to Mars. We are much closer today to being able to send humans to Mars than we were to being able to send men to the moon in 1961, and we were there 8 years later. If President Obama was to get up next week and say, I'm committing the nation, we're going to do this, we could be on Mars before the end of this decade.
I think that's a really interesting point, that it wouldn't take that long to actually get the mission together to go to Mars, to get people there. I mean, we've sent robot missions to Mars numerous times. There was a recent book written, and just at the moment the name of the author is completely escaping me, on going to Mars, and I heard her speak at the SETI Con recently, and she said, there was a statement she made that a lot of people are against the idea of sending people to Mars right now, because at this point in time it would be a one-way mission, and people are, that scares people, sending people on a mission where they're going to go die on this foreign
That's
planet.
ludicrous. That's Mary Roach, and she is a journalist who doesn't know what she's talking about. She's not an engineer, and she literally doesn't know what she's talking about. She wrote a funny book, which is selling well, but she's not knowledgeable on the subject. Okay. To go to Mars, the problems that are being mentioned are problems. They have to be addressed competently, but they're not impossible problems. The radiation dose you would get going to Mars with present-day propulsion is less than the radiation dose that many astronauts have received on multiple tours of the space station, and not one of them has experienced any radiological health effects. Zero gravity does harm human health, but we don't have to go to Mars in zero gravity. We can rotate the spacecraft and create artificial gravity. The idea of a 2.5-year mission as a human factors challenge, well, yes, it is more challenging than most of us experience in our daily lives, but Anne Frank and her family were in an attic for 2.5 years with Nazis running around on the outside with listening devices under much more difficult human factors situation than would be faced by a picked crew of astronauts on their way to Mars with the whole world cheering for them and mission support holding their hand. From the point of view of technology, as I said, there were much more unknowns when Kennedy launched the moon program. For us to say right now that we can't send humans to Mars and back in a mission engineered over a 10-year period is really saying that we've become much less than the kind of people we used to be. And frankly, I think that is what this country cannot afford.
So do you think that we've just politically lost that will? What do you think it would take to bring that back?
Well, I think it will take competent political leadership. I mean, what we had with Kennedy, you had decisive leadership on this, visionary leadership. Frankly, it was a completely orthogonal, out-of-the-box thinking that says a way to take on the Russians in the Cold War is to compete with them in space, as opposed to, say, invade Cuba with the Marines, which would be a more traditional response.
Right.
And we did something absolutely remarkable that won us the applause of the entire world, including, I must say, the Soviet population, because you know where I was when the astronauts landed on the moon? I was in Leningrad. And every every Russian I knew came up to me, and the way they do, they punch you softly on the shoulder and they say "Molodets," which means that a boy. I mean, they thought this was great. And it said to them exactly what we wanted it to say to them, that this was the way to the future. Freedom was the way to the future. Exactly the message we wanted to send. And we did it without killing anybody. It was far more effective at winning the Cold War than our deployment in Vietnam at that time, which produced nothing. This sent the right message. If we want to send the right message again about what America stands for, we should commit to Mars. And it would not just send that message to people around the world, okay? It would send that message to our own youth who are looking for purpose. It would say to every one of them, because youth seeks adventure, it says, learn your science and you can be a pioneer of new worlds. And out of that challenge, we get millions of scientists and inventors and engineers and technological entrepreneurs and doctors and medical researchers, just like we did out of Apollo, which doubled the number of our science ventures. But we need to have leadership that can see this. Instead, we've had fakery. You had Bush say, yes, NASA needs a goal. We should set our sights on the moon and Mars, and you can start working on it as soon as I'm out of office. And you have Obama saying almost the same thing, saying, yes, the moon is not visionary enough. I want to go to asteroids and not go to Mars, and then go to Mars. But once again, asteroid in 2025, which means you start working on it after 2016, even if he wins a second term after that. So in other words, he pretends to be visionary, but says, yes, this is a great thing, and I have a great vision, and people can start working on it after I'm out of here. That's not what Kennedy said. Kennedy said, we're going to do it in 8 years, which means we start working on it today. And that is the kind of leadership you need to have. And frankly, this stuff about risk, it is amazing to me that a country that has 150,000 young men and women right now in combat in Afghanistan and Iraq, and it is true that people who join the military today are volunteers, but they're still not volunteers in the same sense that astronauts are, who not merely volunteer to be part of an organization which, like the military, some members of whom take risks, but to say, I'm going to carry the flag to another planet, okay, that these people are not willing to accept the risk, which the astronauts certainly are. We saw this, it was almost farcical with the Hubble repair mission, okay, where we had actually been to Hubble 4 times before.
Yeah.
And it needed another upgrade or it would go out of commission. And NASA Administrator Sean O'Keefe suddenly said it's too risky to go to Hubble. All of a sudden, it was too risky to do a mission we had already done 4 times before. Okay, now it's true, going to Hubble involved risk. Shuttles, by the numbers, 1 in 50 shuttle missions fail. There's a 2% chance you're going to get killed if you fly on the shuttle. Okay, but astronauts are up for that. That's why they're astronauts. Okay, and I have to say that Hubble, okay, as the prized scientific accomplishment, kind of like the Gothic cathedral of our age, celebrating the highest ideals of our time, which is the search for scientific truth. Okay, and in addition to that, okay, something that O'Keefe might understand, it was $4 billion worth of the taxpayers' property. Okay, that's as much as an aircraft carrier costs. And if any captain of an aircraft carrier allowed his ship to sink because he wasn't willing to let 7 volunteers go below to patch up a leak when the odds in their favor were only 50 to 1, that captain would be court-martialed. And yet we have a bureaucracy here which is allowed to, or thought it was allowed to behave that way. Fortunately, Congress basically ran O'Keefe out of office for adopting that position. Fortunately, we still had a political class that wasn't willing to buy into that cowardly a view of what our space program should be doing. But still, here you have Obama, and in a different way, Bush. I'm not going to be partisan about this. This is a bipartisan problem here, okay, who is now saying, we're going to run our human spaceflight program for the next 10 years at a cost of $100 billion without actually going anywhere.
Right.
Now,
are you going to keep spending that money, and what are you spending it on, and where how is it advancing us?
Well, that's just the point. It's not advancing us. There are people who say The human space program is a waste of money. That's $100 billion. We could spend that on medical research. We could spend that on a variety of social programs. We could spend it on any number of useful things, highway repairs, you name it, okay, rather than this. Now, my answer to that is that's all true, but opening up a new world represents a sufficient achievement in terms of adding to the potential of the human future that it's worth not spending the money on all those worthy things in order to spend it to open Mars. But if you're just going to waste that money, if you're going to spend it on a human spaceflight program that doesn't actually explore space, then all of a sudden those people, they got a point.
Yeah. How about a human spaceflight program that depends on sending robots to the moon or to Mars and never actually sends humans anywhere?
Well, because once again, here's the thing. You have me at a certain disadvantage because the robotic space exploration program has actually had objectives. And we really do have rovers on Mars.
Yeah. And they've been very successful.
Yes, within the limits of what rovers can do. Okay, and given the fact that the people have not gone to Mars, the rovers are outperforming them. But in fact, if you had people on Mars, they would outperform those rovers by 1,000 to 1, literally 1,000 to 1. And I could say that with two forms of authority. One is my own. The Mars Society has set up practice Mars stations in the Arctic and in the desert. And what we have found is that human explorers, forced to wear spacesuits and explore as astronauts would, can literally outperform robots, which we've had out there, even robots with zero time delay, telerobots, by 1,000 to 1. Also, Steve Squires, who is the principal investigator on the Mars Exploration Rover mission, he has said repeatedly that there's no comparison between what the rovers can do and what a human explorer could do on the scene. Now, if the humans don't actually go to Mars, then sure, the rovers are better. Okay, a human space exploration program that does not actually go anywhere accomplishes zero. Okay, so in that sense, you could say the robots have done a much better job. But if we got humans to do what humans can do, there's no comparison whatsoever between the kind of exploration we can conduct.
Yeah. So there's a problem in the political funding and the politically driven missions to Mars, or the idea of getting to Mars and sending people there. What about the private sphere? You say 10 years is a time frame that something could happen. Could this be achieved in the private sector with technology that would be developed could technology be developed over the next 10 years that could make it happen?
Well, sure. The problem with a private mission, okay, there's two kinds of private endeavors, for-profit and non-profit. If there is a profit motive in play, it's easy. It's like water going downhill. It just happens, okay? You don't have to even ask anyone to make it happen. It will happen. If there's money to be made, it will happen. It will happen even if you try to tell people not to do it. It will happen, okay? But but right now, that there's no apparent profit of that kind in play that would support a human Mars mission. Now, what about nonprofit? There are many things that are done not for profit. Colleges build buildings and football stadiums with donations from alumni, which is not done with any expectation of profit on the part of the alumni, but simply they want to have their name on the football stadium or whatever. Mm-hmm. They're looking for some form of immortality, and money can be raised that way. Conceivably, if the world continues to get richer, and the world is getting richer, the gross domestic product of the world is growing exponentially, there may be a time when there's enough billionaires in the world that enough of them who are interested in this kind of thing will pool, $500 million each and put together $10 billion, because you could do this a lot cheaper if it was done in the private world, and just initiate a Mars program. That's possible. We're not there yet. Mm-hmm. Another thing, and this is a proposal, I've actually published it in Space News this week, whereby NASA could set up what I call a transorbital railroad, and this would make it much cheaper for anyone to do anything in space at which point the idea of a privately funded human Mars mission becomes much more tenable, whether done by a group of 20 billionaires or by an organization like the Mars Society raising $100 from millions of people. And so let me explain how the transorbital railroad could work. Because if we don't have a NASA that's got the nerve to send humans to Mars itself, what it could do is make it a lot easier for anyone else to send humans to Mars.
Okay.
And here's how. What if we simply set up a program where NASA would do 12 launches to orbit every year, one a month? Every other month, a heavy lift launch vehicle with 100-ton to orbit capacity, and every other month, a medium lift vehicle with a 20-ton to orbit capacity. Okay, and it pays for these launches from the private sector. If you did this, the heavy lifters might cost $500 million each, and the small lifters $70 million each. So you're talking about a program which in total costs about $3.7 billion a year, which is only about 2/3 of the shuttle program. But instead of launching 80 tons a year to orbit, it would launch 700 tons a year to orbit. Now these launches, the space on these launches would be sold to the public at greatly discounted prices. So for instance, the entire 100-ton to orbit vehicle would be sold for $10 million, or 10% of it, a 10-ton compartment for $1 million, a 1-ton compartment for $100,000, a 100-kilogram compartment for $10,000. Okay, so that anyone with fairly modest resources would be able to get to space, and with very significant payloads. Now, these launch spaces would be sold to commercial companies, to private individuals, to universities, to government agencies. So, for instance, if JPL wants to send a probe to Mars, they could buy a 10-ton spot on one of these launches and send a probe to Mars, and their launch cost would basically be zero. If the NASA Exploration Space Office ever got it together and decided it actually wanted to build a Mars base or a moon base, they wouldn't have to figure out how to design launch vehicles. They just book 3 flights on the railroad. No, it's like a railroad. The trains run whether they're filled or not. Now, the space that's not filled, we could fill it with water, with food, with fuel, with liquid oxygen, launch that in canisters and leave them in orbit to be salvaged by anybody with the initiative to go and make use of them. So now we're launching 700 tons a year. It's easy for anyone to pay to get to orbit. If the Europeans think that this is unfair subsidized competition, they're welcome to create a transorbital railroad of their own, and now we've got 1,400 tons going to orbit.
Right.
And maybe the Russians do. We got 2,000 tons going to orbit. Okay, so all of a sudden, orbital enterprise and space enterprise in general beyond Earth orbit becomes possible, and
yeah, because this is currently happening into Earth orbit, so that payloads going up into orbit to launch small satellites. A lot of people are getting into the like CubeSats and other things.
Yeah, but the price is much too high.
Yeah,
right now it costs like $10,000 a kilogram to go to Earth orbit.
This would lower really expensive.
This would lower the price to $100 a kilogram. It would lower it by a factor of 100.
Yeah.
Okay, and all of a sudden, all kinds of space ventures would become possible. Now, some of these are things that I believe in, like humans to Mars. Other people have other ideas. They think they can build solar power satellites to beam power down to Earth. I don't think that business plan works, even with 100-fold drop in price of launch to orbit. But they'd be willing to give their dream a try. The people who believe in space hotels would be willing to give their dream a try. The people who think the next step is the lunar base would be able to give their idea a try. In other words, this would make everything possible for everyone, kind of like the Transcontinental Railroad. Yeah. Transcontinental Railroad didn't ask people what they were going to do once they reached California. It just made it possible for them to go to California. Okay, and once they got there, they tried out different things, some of which worked and some of which didn't. But what we got out of it was California.
Yeah, I think, and California's doing all right. I mean, we've got some political and some economic troubles, but, we're doing all right. I think that the idea is fantastic to be able to. Do you think that this kind of a transorbital railroad would have to be, say, a NASA-funded project, or would this be better implemented as an international cooperative deal?
I would prefer it as a NASA-funded project and let the Europeans do their own transorbital. Right. I'd like to see multiple transorbital railroads. And as I say, for, 3 or 4 billion a year, which is to say 15, 20% of NASA's budget, we could just buy these launches from the private launch industry. That would stimulate that industry. They would grow. They would know they had a guaranteed market. They could start implementing economies of scale, roll these things off the assembly line. Then we could drop the prices even more or increase the frequency. And instead of having 1 flight a month, we'd have 2 flights a month or once a week. And we could really do that because unlike the shuttle, which has to be refitted after every launch because it's sort of reusable, or salvageable, if you will. This is just, each one of these vehicles is brand new. You just launch them off, and we could have a launch every week, and we could have, 3,000 tons to orbit launched by the United States alone, and another 3,000 from Europe. Pretty soon, the world will be launching 10,000 tons a year to orbit, and a whole realm of orbital activity and interplanetary activity would be opened up, with different ideas being followed by different groups. Some would work, some would not. But this is a way to do it. That is, if I would like NASA to itself embrace the idea of humans to Mars. And by the way, that's not incompatible with also running the orbital railroad. If they had a humans to Mars program, they could make use of the orbital railroad to great effect. But if it's not going to accept the risk of these sorts of ventures itself, what it can do is make it possible for everyone else to give them a try.
So if we can get ourselves to Mars, if we can get either the political will behind it, the financial will behind it to actually get to Mars, what do you think that the first manned mission to Mars would or should consist of? What challenges will the astronauts, the engineers, the scientists who are on that mission actually be up against when they get to Mars? Okay, well, the first crew that goes to Mars will probably consist of between 4 and 6 men and women. There'll be several scientists in the crew, field scientists, geologists, microbiologists, micropaleontologists, and the other members of the crew will be very strong in engineering skills. In our simulations, the Mars Society's mission simulations in the Arctic and the desert, we invariably found the most valuable member of the crew is the mechanic, the person who is very good at fixing things. Because things always break.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And so we'll probably want at least 2 people on the crew who are just the best fix-its you can possibly find. We'll probably want 2 people in the crew who are extraordinarily adept general field scientists. So in Star Trek terms, 2 Scotties and 2 Spocks. Right. And that defines the minimum crew of 4. If we have more than that, we can have some other kinds of people in the crew. You might have people who are cross-trained. You will have people who are cross-trained. For instance, the microbiologist might also be a person with medical training. I don't think we'll have a person on the crew whose sole responsibility is that of doctor, because those skills only come into play in the event of a contingency, an accident. Hopefully, they'll never come into play. You want to have that ability in the crew, but you want to have that person's day-to-day responsibilities be something that comes into play day-to-day, which would probably, in this case, be biology. That's a natural match. Now, what are they going to do? Okay, first of all, the flight plan is 6 months out, 6 months back, 1.5 years on the Martian surface. That's the flight plan. That's how it has to be to, when you go to Mars, to wait for the planets to move around to give you a good launch window back to Earth. Now, 1.5 years on Mars, that actually makes a lot of sense. If you're going to spend a year in transit, you want to spend at least a comparable amount actually exploring Mars, because that's where the mission payoff is. And what we're going to be doing is exploring. The key questions, of course, bear on life. Life on Mars in the past, life on Mars in the present, and life on Mars in the future. I'll come back to that last one in a minute, but let me focus on the issues of life on Mars, past or present. Mars was once a warm and wet planet. We know that for a fact because we have probes that show that it has water erosion features on it all over the place, dried up rivers, dried up lakes, dried up oceans. There's frozen oceans on Mars, that is amounts of water sufficient to fill oceans. There's salt deposits on the shores of dried up bodies of water of Mars. There's no question that Mars had an aquatic environment for a long period of time, a billion years probably, which is 5 times as long as it took life to appear on Earth after there was liquid water here. So if the theory is correct, that life is a naturally emergent phenomenon from chemistry wherever you have liquid water and various elements and reasonable temperatures in a sufficient period of time, then life should have appeared on Mars, even if it subsequently went extinct after conditions on the surface deteriorated. And if we can go to Mars and hunt for fossils and find them on the Martian surface, we'll have proven that the development of life from chemistry is a general phenomenon in the universe. Now, furthermore, there's a good chance that if there ever was life on Mars, it's still there, underground, because there's very strong evidence that there's liquid water underground on Mars. The Mars Global Surveyor probe took 2 photographs of a crater in 1997 and 2007, and in that interim, a water erosion feature appeared on the side of that crater. So there was apparently a transient outflow of water on that crater in the present, which means there has to be reservoirs of liquid water underground. If there's life on Mars today, that's where it is. It's in the groundwater, just as the Earth's groundwater is rich in microscopic life. And if we go to Mars with people, once again, this is something rovers just can't do. We could set up drilling rigs and drill down into the ground and bring up that water and see what's in it. And if there's life in it, see what that life is like. Does it have the same biochemistry as Earth life? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. All Earth life has the same biochemistry with RNA and DNA and the same amino acids. Life, does it have to be that way, or could it be different? Is life on Earth the pattern for all life, or are we just one example drawn from a much vaster tapestry of possibility? This is what human explorers on Mars can find out. This is something that rovers cannot remotely attempt to do. And I don't think they can do competent fossil hunting either. I mean, I live here in Colorado. This is dinosaur heaven. All the dinosaurs came here to die. You know, we got Triceratops and Tyrannosaurus Rex, and all of them were discovered a few miles from where I'm sitting right now in Morrison, Colorado. And I got news for you. You could parachute 1,000 MER rovers into the Rocky Mountains and explore with them for 100 years, and you would never find a single dinosaur fossil here. It takes trained paleontologists, real live rock hounds, to come here and explore and follow up clues, and then do heavy work, digging and pickaxe work and delicate work, carefully splitting open shales to see what's trapped inside the pasted together sediments or rocks, and all kinds of very arcane skills to tease these fossils out of those mountains.
Yeah, and
so rovers can't do that.
Yeah, it would take a lot of planning to actually get into the soil, look at the formations in Mars, try and figure out, once you know where there's been water, where the most likely places for fossils to show up would be if there were fossils. I mean, but that's getting ahead of the question of, just, is there bacterial life? Or was there bacterial life? Is there bacterial life still there? That's still a big question as well. There are chemical signatures in the atmosphere of Mars that do suggest biological activity. However, that doesn't count out other chemical processes that could also potentially be creating the same thing. So, that's still, kind of putting the cart in front of the horse.
But that's a very good point. Okay. They've detected traces of methane in the Martian atmosphere. And that methane is a recent creation because methane cannot last in the Martian atmosphere. It's destroyed by ultraviolet. So there's methane being created on Mars now. Now, there's only 2 possible sources for that methane. It's either biological from methanogenic microorganisms, or it's from a geothermal, hydrothermal underground vent. Well, a hydrothermal environment is suitable for life. So that is either a signature of life or of a habitat for life. Okay, and either way, that's very much worth exploring, and you can only do that with human explorers.
Yeah, so the argument is that a lot of the work that needs to be done to be able to find the proof, the incontrovertible proof of life on Mars is not something that robots are going to be able to do. It's something that must be done with human hands and human ingenuity. So once we get to Mars, we can, if we find life, we're going to want to set up a colony. I mean, I read the Mars trilogy, and is there any logic to the way that Kim Stanley Robinson set it up? You get started, build a small colony, and then it grows.
Kind of. I mean, he's most realistic in the first book, Red Mars, then he gets increasingly speculative.
Right.
But a lot of what's in Red Mars is a reasonable projection, although he starts out the first mission on a very large scale with, I forget, 70 people or something, and we would start smaller than that. But still, the basic idea is, we're going to settle Mars. That's the point. Because Mars is not just an object of scientific inquiry. It's a world. It's a planet with a surface area equal to all the continents of the Earth put together, and it has on it all the resources needed to support life, and therefore potentially civilization. And if we can go there and figure out how to make use of those resources, develop the craft of making use of all of Martian resources. And, in my mission plan, Mars Direct, we take the first step of making use of the atmosphere to make fuel and oxygen. But you want to go beyond that for a settlement. You want to learn how to grow plants. You want to extract water from the soil, or better yet, geothermally heated water from the subsurface. You want to make ceramics and bricks and glasses and plastics and metals and wires and tubes and habitation structures. You learn the craft of doing those things on Mars, then Mars becomes a place where human settlements can thrive and grow, and eventually grow to the point where, yes, the terraforming of Mars can be addressed, and will be.
Do you think that the terraforming that's been kind of suggested, recommended for Mars is, if there is life on Mars, here's the question. If there is bacterial life on Mars, if there is any life on Mars, is it right for us to terraform? I mean, we're questioning doing it here on our own planet already, but I mean...
No. This is people are using an incorrect analogy in comparing the impact on Martian bacteria of human settlements and terraforming to the impact, say, of Europeans on non-European cultures here on Earth. And that's absolutely wrong. The harm done to non-European cultures on Earth were crimes because they were committed against people. Okay, if we don't hold Albert Schweitzer as a criminal because he went to Africa and killed billions of bacteria by curing people of diseases, we hold Adolf Hitler a criminal because he invaded countries and killed millions of people, even though he provided a feast for trillions of bacteria in the process. He was a great benefactor to bacteria.
Wow.
Okay. What's happened here is this is sort of political correctness that is being misapplied. The ethics have to be based on what they do, the impact of an action on people. Now, if we look at the human settlement of North America, not the human settlement, excuse me, let me correct that. Although we could talk about that too, but let's talk about the more germane question. The European settlement of North America. Okay, there's a trade here. You had this continent, you had the various American Indian tribes with their cultures, you had the great herds of bison, you had the majestic redwood trees, and much of this was destroyed by a white European settlement who instead replaced it with a continental nation with political liberty and has made enormous contributions to technology and invention and literature, and has provided a refuge for people seeking escape from oppression around the world. So there's a trade. Something was lost, something was gained. And you can debate whether that was a good trade or a bad trade. I believe ultimately that was a good trade, but I will admit that something important was also lost in that trade. But I would say that if the North American continent had not had any American Indians or bison or redwood trees, but had been a barren wasteland with nothing on it but a few bacteria, and we had transformed that into a continental nation of liberty filled with, universities and used bookstores and, community theaters and a refuge for people seeking escape from oppression around the world, there would not be anyone protesting at Christopher Columbus Day parades right now.
Fair enough. Yeah. Fair enough. In terms of the question of terraforming and actually changing the makeup of a planet. Would the way that the terraforming would be approached, would that be any different if the life that's potentially found on Mars is of a different makeup? It's not similar to ours. Do you think there would be a different approach that would be taken?
Conceivably, if only because the potential for bioengineering of organisms that could help the terraforming process might be much broader. Right now, we are at the dawn of a new science of bioengineering, and they've engineered varieties of rice that are rich in vitamin A, which ordinary rice it doesn't have, or plants that fix their own nitrogen so they don't need fertilizer, or even make their own insecticide so you don't need to spray insecticide. And these are all very interesting things and have great benefits, but they're all based on making use of the genetic treasury of the Earth and taking gene from this organism and putting it in that organism. Now, let's say we go to Mars and we find a whole new genetic treasury in Martian organisms with offering a broad array of new capabilities, in particular that are adapted to deal with Martian conditions. These might be of enormous value in creating hybrid organisms that could be of enormous assistance to the terraforming process. Now, that's an unproven hypothesis, but you asked me, could it be? And I would say, yes, it could. Will it be? I don't know.
All right. On a personal note, in terms of the exploration of what we know of Mars so far, I came across a folder recently, a binder full of a bunch of images from Martin Marietta of the Viking lander missions, and so it's all these wonderful pictures, and I think that they're press images that would have been sent out for the media, and looking through them, I just realized, the amount of information that we're learning from 30 years ago to what we know now, the resolution of our understanding, the scale of our understanding is a lot finer, but there's still so much that we haven't seen on the surface of Mars of what we don't understand of the chemical makeup of things, the actual geology of specific areas on the planet. What do you think it would take to get our knowledge of Mars to the next level?
Well, ideally, we want to send people. They're far more potent explorers. Look, the Mars rovers that have been on Mars now since 2004, so they've been there more than 6 years. They've each traveled around 6 miles. They're traveling at a rate of a mile a year. Okay, they've traveled in 6 years what a human could walk in 2 hours. Okay, and when a human does that walk in those 2 hours, he or she just turning their head and looking this way and that way are taking the equivalent of thousands of high-resolution images of everything around them. And, in a day they can gather hundreds of samples instead of one sample brought back by a robotic Mars sample return 10 years from now. So human exploration is the key. Now, if you're asking, though, about a robotic mission that would be of interest to me, in addition to these rover missions, I'd like to send balloons to Mars. We've got a kind of balloon now. It's called a super pressure balloon that can float for hundreds of days. And if we set loose a bunch of those on Mars with cameras floating around for hundreds of days and just photographing this place, not from orbit, but from a bird's eye view, from a few thousand feet up, so you have a horizontal view. You can see the mountains from the side, not just looking down. You can see the planet, and tour it with these balloons that would travel around and around. It could go around the planet in a few weeks each. So first of all, there'd be some real science in those images, believe me, because despite all the snobbery, the scientists ultimately get their information the way all humans do, which is from their eyes. But more so, I think it would change people's concept of Mars. You see, it's like this. Even though it's now 500 years since Copernicus, most people still think of the universe in a geocentric context. In other words, they know there are other planets, they know there are other stars which are suns, but that's academic. In terms of how they feel about things, the way they feel about it is there's the world, which is to say the Earth, and then there's the sky above it that is illustrated by various points of light. So that's how they actually think of things. They don't really think of Mars as a world. They don't really think of the universe as a place that is filled with numerous Earths, you know, but if we simply toured Mars from the sky with balloons and we photographed the canyons, the mountains, the vast plains, the ice fields, the dry riverbeds, all this, and we understand that Mars is not just a point of light in the sky, and it's not just a small little area the size of a 7-Eleven parking lot for a little rover to go around in, but it's this vast world filled with possibilities, filled with continents, as it were, of possibilities. Then people won't ask the question, what's so important about Mars? Because it's like someone in a little village somewhere asking what's so important about Europe or the rest of the world outside of my village. Because
I think people do ask those questions, though.
Well, they do, but they need to realize that there is a world outside of their village, and it is important.
Absolutely, and I think that's a good point to start closing down the show on. We're getting towards the end of our time, and I'd love to hear your answer, you know, to people who, you know, we talked about the politics of getting to Mars at the beginning of the show. We've talked a little bit, we really haven't dug in nearly that much into the technical challenges of getting to Mars. But we've talked a bit about terraforming and the importance, like what is important about Mars. But in truth, you know, people are looking at the economy the way that it is right now. They're looking at all sorts of issues, and the argument that I hear over and over again is, why should we put money into going to space? You know, what is space
when we can spend it on the state police to harass motorists instead?
Right. And if we're going to go to space, then, you know, the moon is close. If we get to the moon and create a moon base, then, you know, that'll help us get to Mars. You know, why go directly there?
Well, these are two different questions. The question of the moon versus Mars, the reason why we should go to Mars is because Mars is where the science is, it's where the challenge is, and it's where the future is. It's the challenge that's been staring us in the face. And, you know, the Bush administration's program of return to the moon, a half century after we were there the first time, I thought that represented an inadequate ambition for an agency that was set up to storm heaven. Okay, the Obama program of spending the next 10 years without even going anywhere is even worse.
Yeah.
So if we're going to have a human space exploration program, it should really do human space exploration. It should accept the challenges of that, and it should have goals that are worthy of the risks and costs of human space exploration, and that goal is humans to Mars. Now, the more fundamental question, though, that you asked is, why should we have a human space exploration program? Okay. Well, you know, the fact that there are human needs today does not preclude us addressing the future. Just because there are people hungry today does not mean you should not put away seed corn so you can plant for a harvest next year. Now, I don't think that humans to Mars is the only thing we should be doing scientific research in. By no means. There's innumerable other fields that are also worthy, and we need to have a balanced portfolio of our research. But one of them should be opening up the universe to humankind.
And one of the people in our chat room has asked a great question that I'd love to ask you. How can we each help to make this happen?
Well, I think we need to take every opportunity when we have contact with our political representatives or the members of the executive, to let them know in no uncertain terms that we Americans want and we think we deserve a space program that is actually going somewhere. And that this is the sort of thing this country ought to be doing. That we were created as a nation of pioneers. We owe everything we have to previous generations who are willing to come across oceans and risk everything to start new lives in a new world and build cities where they've never been built before and do all kinds of things that have never been done before. And for us to all of a sudden say we're not willing to take those kinds of risks, we're not willing to open up new kinds of futures to our posterity, we're not willing to accept that. We're not willing to accept the idea that we've reached the age of limits. We're not willing to accept the idea that we are no longer a nation of pioneers. We are a nation of pioneers. We must be one. That's who we are. And we're not willing to accept the political leadership that is going to make us less than who we are.
And thank you very much for that. I appreciate the passion that you bring to this subject and your years of experience in thinking about it and trying to work as hard as you have to get people to Mars. And hopefully it's going to happen one day. I think it will. It's just, when's it going to happen? Yeah.
It'll happen when we make it happen. Let me just mention a couple of resources.
Yeah, please.
I've written a book. It's called The Case for Mars. People can get it on Amazon. It's widely available. It's also in many libraries. And also we have the Mars Society. It's at marssociety.org. And we are doing many things to help push forward the agenda of human and also robotic exploration of Mars. And if people want to get involved, they should just join the Mars Society.
All right. Great. Dr. Robert Zubrin, the chat room has said thank you very much. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank you as well for joining me today. I do appreciate your conversation on this topic and the time out of your schedule. And I'd love to be able to get you on again. There's so much we didn't touch on. It only less than an hour. And there's this such a huge
we can do
topic.
It again.
Okay.
Let's do it again in a month or so.
Okay. All right. Sounds wonderful. We'll make it happen.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Have a great evening.
Okay. Same to you. Bye.
This has been Dr. Kiki Science Hour with Dr. Robert Zubrin. He's the president of the Mars Society. And as he said, you can visit marssociety.org to see what they're up to and join yourself if that's what you are so inclined to do. Thank you very much for watching. You can find more programs like these, Dr. Kiki's Science Hour. You can find more of this at www.twit.tv/Kiki. And you can also find me around the internet if you look for Dr. Kiki in the Google machine. And additionally, my program This Week in Science airs every Thursday live on the TWIT network at 7:30 p.m. Pacific time. But additionally, you can find the podcast and show notes at twis.org. That's another place for more science-y goodness. And I love this topic of Marsifest destiny. It really, what are we doing? Where are we going? Is this where humanity is going to go? Is space the final frontier? Indeed, that's a question that we should ask ourselves. Are we just stuck here on this planet? Do we have goals of reaching out and going beyond the confines of the borders of our atmosphere? To the moon. To the moon, Alice. Anyway, I'll be back next week. And I can't remember who's scheduled, but I do have a guest scheduled. I promise I'm working ahead this time. And let me think if there's anything else that I need to tell you, and I don't think that there is. So I think that's the end of the show. Thank you much. Thank you very, very much for watching. Do appreciate it. Those of you in the chat room, I appreciate your conversation, your questions. I try to see what I can read when I'm paying attention to the guest and in between, but I do appreciate you watching and asking questions. But don't forget, subscribe, because, it's the download counts that kind of matter in the numbers game here. So if you can subscribe to Dr. Kiki Science Hour, I'd really appreciate it. You can do that in iTunes pretty easily, or straight from, like I said, twit.tv/Kiki. You can subscribe right there. That's it. I'll be back next week, and I do appreciate your time. Just 1 hour a week. That's all I ask. to make your world a lot more interesting.